Good morning. I hope that I'm audible to everyone. If I'm not at any time, please cup your hand over your ear and I'll elevate my voice. I'm so glad you came. This talk is the first of two parts. The second part will be delivered on the 26th of this month, on that Sunday. Why I don't believe in death. So I've outlined the topics that I want to cover in this first part. The first is belief and its significance. How significant it is, the things that we believe. The second thing, I want to share quotes from famous people who, like me, do not believe that death is the end. The third thing I want to cover today is to go through some of the sources that may have inspired that disparagement of the conceit that death is the end in these people who have attested that they don't believe it, as I don't believe it. And finally, as a kind of segue into what I'll cover on the 26th, I want to begin to talk about the fact that in Wichita, in Toledo, in Barcelona, in London, in Minsk, wherever there are people who have had experiences that they can only explain by saying, I am convinced that death is not the end. So, to begin with, you may like to look in your hymnal because I'm going to read responsive reading number 657. You might like to read along with me. It sometimes helps to comprehend better what's being said. Number 657, it matters what we believe. Some beliefs are like walled gardens. They encourage exclusiveness and the feeling of being especially privileged. Other beliefs are expansive and lead the way into wider and deeper sympathies. Some beliefs are like shadows, clouding children's days with fears of unknown calamities. Some beliefs are divisive, separating the saved from the unsaved, friends from enemies. Other beliefs are bonds in a world community where sincere differences beautify the pattern. Some beliefs are like blinders, shutting off the power to choose one's own direction. Other beliefs are like gateways, opening wide vistas for exploration. Some beliefs weaken a person's selfhood. They blight the growth of resourcefulness. Other beliefs nurture self-confidence and enrich the feeling of personal worth. Some beliefs are rigid, like the body of death, impotent in a changing world. Other beliefs are pliable, like the young sapling ever growing with the upward thrust of life. So, I would say that there are many people who find it impossible to believe in an afterlife, in multiple identities, in eternal existence. Impossible. So I want to share with you some advice that was given, couched in the language of nonsense by the famous nonsense writer Lewis Carroll, through the looking glass. Alice was interrogated by the White Queen as to her age, and she said she was 7. And then she politely asked the White Queen how old she was, and the White Queen replied that she was just 105, 5 months and a day. To which Alice said, I can't believe that. Can't you? The Queen said in a pitying tone. Try again. Draw a long breath and shut your eyes. Alice laughed. There's no use trying, she said. One can't believe impossible things. I dare say you haven't had much practice, said the Queen. When I was your age, I always did it for half an hour a day. Why, sometimes I believed in as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast. I think that's good advice. I think Lewis Carroll was describing a meditative state. Draw a deep breath, become mindful, and then challenge your beliefs. Interrogate your beliefs. Turn them upside down and shake them. See what comes out. In fact, many things that we believe to be true are false. And many things that we believe to be beautiful are actually ugly. And I want to read now from Charles Peirce, the famous and very influential 19th century American philosopher who is sometimes credited with being the father of pragmatism, very American kind of school of philosophy. This is from an article he wrote called The Fixation of Belief. We generally know when we wish to ask a question and when we wish to pronounce a judgment. For there is a dissimilarity between the sensation of doubting and that of believing. But this is not all which distinguishes doubt from belief. There's a practical difference. Our beliefs guide our desires and shape our actions. The assassins, or the followers of the old man of the mountain, used to rush into death at his least command because they believed that obedience to him would ensure everlasting felicity. Had they doubted this, they would not have acted as they did. So it is with every belief, according to its degree. The feeling of believing is more or less a sure indication of there being established in our nature some habit which will determine our actions. Doubts never have such an effect. So, it's a great article, by the way. You can find it online, The Fixation of Belief by Charles Peirce. You can see me afterwards if you want to read the length of it. But the point that jumps out to me that I think is relevant to what I want to say today, we're going to look at the belief in spiritual survival of death. We're going to hear from people who attested that they embraced that as the truth. But I know that you're familiar with the refutation of that. And so what I want to do here and now is say, why is it that people refute certain beliefs when there is so much evidence that those beliefs are false? What is it? Now, Peirce deals with this. He talks about the fact that when we're in doubt, there's a kind of insecurity. And we wish to feel secure, so we embrace a belief. And we're not so much concerned with whether it's true or not. We're concerned with protecting it because it prevents us from feeling anxiety, which we don't want to have. A lot of times, the things that we believe for very inauthentic reasons. I'll give a couple of examples. When the Europeans first came to this world, they were either Vikings or they were Celts. They were gentle in their interpersonal relations with the native people. They intermarried, they shared arts and crafts, they shared skills. You can read about this. Barry Fell, Harvard professor, wrote a book called America, B.C. Ivan Van Sertima wrote a book called They Came Before Columbus, Rutgers scholar. Those were the first waves of people from the old world, quote unquote, to the new world. Africans, Celts, Vikings. But the second wave is very different. The settlers that came in the second wave, committed genocide, essentially, against the indigenous people of this land. That genocide was horrific. The consequences of it, a nation or nations of people are still reeling from. And the people who perpetrated the genocide, and if you read the details, it's hideous, the atrocities that were committed against the Native American people who were living here. The people who committed these acts had to believe that it was okay to do that. That to do that would prosper them. That to do that would not harm them. To disparage the humanity and the culture of the Native American people, to end their lives brutally, to enforce into concentration camps the habitation of these people. That was all okay. Why? Because there was a belief behind that it's okay. There's no consequence to me. I will prosper. Okay, second example. Again, in the early days of the American settlement, there were white and black indentured servants and slaves. I don't know how many of you know, I've said it before from this pulpit, but the slave trade wasn't only originally aimed at dark-skinned Africans. Slavers would pull into port in towns like Edinburgh and Dublin, and they would walk the streets and they would snatch children and other defenseless white-bodied people and bring them down to the ships and sell them into slavery in the Caribbean. So whites and blacks. But after a while, it was realized that, well, black people can't hide their identity, and it's very easy to say these people are inferior, they're not important, they're not human, they're just property, they have no feelings, they have no culture, they're depraved, etc., etc. It's okay to do this. Now, it also relates to the theme of spiritual survival of death. As you will hear when I read some of the sources, many of the teachings, Judaic, Christian, Islamic, Hindu, Buddhist, and other, teach a principle announced, for instance, in Christianity as you sow, so shall you reap. The principle of karma. If I do harm to you, harm will come to me. And that harm that will come to me, it's elaborated almost always, will be greater than the harm that I visit on you. Just like if I go into a store and I steal a $25 radio, I can't be exonerated if I'm captured by giving $25. Look, here's $25, I'm okay. No. You got to return the property, and you may be fined $500, or you may be imprisoned, or both. Do you see? Crime and punishment. The crime merits a punishment greater than the crime in an effort to reform you. And in these systems, as above mentioned, the idea is that the spiritual survivor, the witness, the soul, the spirit, reaps what it has sown, and there's an increment, an exponential increment in the value, beatitude or suffering. It matters what we believe. I got a few responses to my Facebook post. I caught up with it late, but there's an interview that I posted up there with a young woman who was running a daycare center when an armed and depraved madman came in with an automatic weapon and like a suitcase full of ammunition, and the announcement that he was going to kill everybody. He shot up the room that she was in. She was there alone with this madman with all this violent instruments of destruction with him. And she calmly, well, she said later, I was terrified. But she appeared to be very in possession of herself as she talked him out of it. And she ultimately got him, do you know what I'm talking about? How many have, in the school? She was a bookkeeper, school in Atlanta, back in September, okay. African-American lady, seemed to be in her 30s, okay. She convinced him to put down his weapons, lie down on the floor, make the announcement that he wasn't going to hurt anybody, and the police came in and took him away without committing violence on him, and nobody was injured. And she credited her pastor. She said her pastor was always telling her, anchor yourself in thoughts of God. Be confident that God is with you at every moment, and do what would be pleasing to God. And she said, I just went there when I was confronted with this. I was terrified, but I knew that beyond that door were hundreds of children who were in my care. I think she was more than a bookkeeper. I think she founded that institution. She said, these people were in my care, young children. No? She didn't found the institution. She was the bookkeeper. Okay. That's my better half. You're hearing from my conscience here. Yeah. Anyhow, she just thought, I've got to protect these people. I will follow what my pastor said. I'll just reflect on the Lord. The Lord is with me. I must do this. She had a belief. She had a belief. We're not talking about whether her belief was true or false. We're talking about the utility of that belief in a moment of emergency. Now, we talked earlier, I say earlier, I mean months ago, I spoke about a woman in the UK. She came upon a situation. She was on a bus, and she looked out of the window and she saw a soldier who had been run over deliberately by two terrorists and then hacked up with a meat cleaver. And what would you do? She believed that the best thing for her to do was get off the bus, interrupt her trip, and stop and talk to these two terrorists and prevent them from doing any more harm. And she spoke to them, and she said later, because I watched the interviews with her, and I'm remembering as best I can, but essentially she thought, these are human beings, these terrorists. They're crazy, they're doing horrible things, but there's something motivating them. If I can relate to them as human beings, I might be able to prevent them from doing more harm. And she put aside her concern about her welfare. Or, and here I'm extrapolating, she thought my welfare is best served by intervening here. I understand that sentiment. That, okay, if I ride by and just say, oh, too bad, I have diminished my humanity. If I confront this evil and I effectively stop it, I have come home to myself, who I really am. Anyhow, that's part one. It matters what we believe. So part two is quotes from famous people who believe that death is not the end. Ben Franklin, finding myself to exist in the world, I believe I shall in some shape or other always exist. I look upon death as to be as necessary to the Constitution as sleep. We shall rise refreshed in the morning. Mark Twain, I've been born more times than anybody except Krishna. Leo Tolstoy, as we live through thousands of dreams in our present life, so is our present life only one of many thousands of such lives, which we enter from the other, more real world, and then return after death. Our life is but one of the dreams of that more real world. And so it is endlessly until the very last one, the very real life of God. Henry Ford, practical man, businessman, wealthy, successful industrialist. I adopted the theory of reincarnation when I was 26. Genius is experience. Some seem to think of it as a gift or a talent, but it is the fruit of long experience in many lives. Goethe. As long as you're not aware of the continual law of die and be again, you are merely a vague guest upon a dark earth. Nietzsche. Live so that thou mayest desire to live again. That is thy duty, for in any case thou wilt live again. And I'll read a couple more. Gandhi. I cannot think of permanent enmity between man, and believing as I do in the theory of reincarnation, I live in the hope that, if not in this birth, in some other birth, I shall be able to hug all of humanity in a friendly embrace. Now, we heard from Emerson, and if you go through Emerson's work, there is so much evidence that he believed in reincarnation. If you go through Margaret Fuller's work, and Emerson always credited Margaret Fuller as being the most brilliant intellectual in his circle of transcendentalists and a great influence on him. She, too, subscribed to this idea that we're eternal, we survive our deaths, we take birth again and again. Emerson. The soul comes from without into the human body as into a temporary abode, and it goes out of it anew, and it passes into other habitations, for the soul is immortal. It is the secret of the world that all things subsist and do not die, but only retire a little from sight, and afterwards return again. Nothing is dead. Men feign themselves dead and endure mock funerals, and there they stand, looking out of the window, sound and well, in some strange new disguise. Unitarian Albert Schweitzer. Reincarnation contains a most comforting explanation of reality, by means of which Indian thought surmounts difficulties which baffle the thinkers of Europe. And that leads me to segue into the third, some of the sources. I mean, Goethe, Nietzsche, Emerson, Fuller. These were deep thinkers. These were intellectuals. These were literati. They were deeply studied people of great integrity. Where did they derive this from? Was it only just some experience they had, or was it that their intuition and their direct experience was bolstered and supported by proof texts and sources? Let's look at some of the teachings. I'm going to look, first of all, at Eastern thought, sometimes considered more antique, but I hope to sidestep any controversy about the antiquity of East as versus West. But from the Upanishads, this is Katha Upanishad. The all-knowing self was never born, nor will it die. Beyond cause and effect, the self is eternal and immutable. When the body dies, the self does not die. If the slayer believes that he can kill, or the slain believes he can be killed, neither knows the truth. The eternal self slays not, nor is it slain. Hidden in the heart of every creature exists the self. Subtler than the subtlest, greater than the greatest. They go beyond all sorrow, who extinguish, and this is small self, who extinguish their self-will and behold the glory of the self through the grace of the Lord of love. So that's Upanishadic, very ancient Eastern thought. Buddhism, that would require a longer discussion because Buddhism gives a complicated answer to that, and there are too many Buddhists in my audience for me to attempt too short and abbreviated. But at least the idea that the things that we do in one life afflict or reward us in another, that's consistent with Buddhist thought in general. So turning to Western proof texts. Judaism. In Kabbalah, there's a teaching, and not conservative Jews, Orthodox Jews very often do not give much weight to this. Then again, some of the Orthodox, like Hasidic persons, may give great credence to the idea of Gilgul. Gilgul in Hebrew means wheel, the wheel of life. And they accepted and discussed and ratified this idea under the rubric of theodicy, which is to say, why is it that humans who are blameless are sometimes treated atrociously, and humans who are wicked and reprehensible in their behavior are sometimes seemingly rewarded and exalted? How is that just? And if there is a deity, how can the deity countenance these gross injustices? And if the deity is responsible for these gross injustices, doesn't that nullify the divinity of the deity? I mean, what's going on here? This is the struggle of theodicy, to explain why is there evil. And so the Hebraic rabbinic thought attached itself to the idea that transmigration of the soul or reincarnation explains why these things occur from past lives. Rabbi Manasseh ben Israel. The belief in the doctrine of transmigration of souls is a firm and infallible dogma accepted by the whole assemblage of our congregation with one accord, so that there is none to be found who would dare deny it. Indeed, there are a great number of sages in Israel who hold firm to this doctrine, so that they made it a dogma, a fundamental part of our religion. We are therefore duty-bound to obey and accept this dogma with acclamation, as the truth of it has been incontestably demonstrated by the Zohar and all the books of the Kabbalists. Christianity. And now, I hope that I have a moment to problematize this for you. Again, I was talking earlier when I was quoting from Pierce. Belief, it's a very, very curious phenomenon. A lot of times people believe things that they know aren't true because it serves a purpose that they want served, and so they believe it. You know what I'm talking about. Joe knows what I'm talking about, and I hope everybody else does, okay? Okay, so, like, if you go online and you look up reincarnation in Christianity, you will find hit after hit after hit after hit debunking it. Debunking it, discrediting it, disparaging it, rejecting it. And where is it coming from? It's coming from Christians who feel deeply offended because their comfort zone is being threatened. That's not what Jesus said to me yesterday. He said something about, I'm going to heaven and you're not. You know, but come on. Geddes McGregor, very prominent Christian theologian, has looked at a couple of examples that he says are evidence that this pervasive teaching of Gilgul, which Jesus as a rabbi was familiar with, was part of the fabric of early Christianity. One is the instance where Jesus and his disciples are confronted by someone who says, here's a man born blind. Tell us, Rabbi, is he born blind because of his own sin or because of the sin of his parents? And famously, Jesus says, it matters not. Here's an opportunity for me to demonstrate the power of God. And McGregor points out that if they were mounting a ridiculous argument, Jesus, throughout the New Testament, whenever his disciples said something foolish, chastised them. How could you say something so foolish? Don't say something so foolish as that. He didn't say, how could you suppose he could be being punished for sins that he committed before his birth? That's so foolish. You know he didn't exist before his birth. Jesus doesn't say that. And so McGregor says this is one instance that supports the currency of the idea of reincarnation among the Jews and among the early Christians, the followers of Jesus. And another is the identity of John the Baptist. I won't go through, because I'm looking at the clock, the details, but they are there. And for Islam, I'll be very brief, but in Islam, there's controversy. And the mystics of Islam, just as the mystics of Christianity and the mystics of Judaism, accept and promulgate the teaching of transmigration. So Jalaluddin Rumi, Mevlana, the famous Sufi mystic who was loved by the Christians in Turkey, loved by the Jews in Turkey, and loved by the Muslims in Turkey equally well. He said this about reincarnation. I died as a mineral and became a plant. I died as a plant and rose to animal. I died as an animal and I was man. Why should I fear death? When was I less by dying? So there are so many texts. There are so many discourses. There are so many famous people whose intellectuality, whose integrity is beyond reproach, who have subscribed to this doctrine. Why is it disparaged so violently by some? I submit that it is disparaged so violently by some because either it threatens their comfort zone, the idea that I have to go through this again, oh my God, no, no, no. Or worse, you mean if I have enslaved these people, murdered and raped and sold my own children, that I visited upon an unwilling person, that I might have to be punished in future lives for this? No. Unthinkable. Well, if that's true, I'd have to stop. I'd have to repent. I'd have to do penance. Oh, I don't know what I'd have to do. I better not believe that. I say that because of the threat to people's comfort, there's antagonism to whole systems of belief that if you study them, make more sense than that which counters them, like spiritual survival of death. As a hospice chaplain, and here I'm segueing into the fourth part of what I wanted to share this morning. As a chaplain, I very, very often, I worked for 7 years with the actively dying. So when I say very, very often, I mean there were dozens of cases where people told me that they either personally experienced something that convinced them that they will not die when the body ceases to breathe, but that they will travel, that they will continue to exist. Or the person who was dying, who I was ministering to, shared some experience that made them feel that way. So family members or the persons themselves who were dying gave personal testament to experiences that they had. And sometimes I would assure them by telling them what I will elaborate on in my next talk on the 26th, that I personally have also had experiences that convinced me personally through direct experience that I dwell in the body. The body is not me. When the body is done, no more a fit habitation for me, that's not the end of me. It's the end of my habitation in that body. So it's a little transgressive to talk about those kind of things, personal experiences. The people that shared with me at the hospice did so in confidence. and I kept confidential their disclosures to me. When I speak on the 26th, I won't be naming names, giving addresses and phone numbers, but I'll be recounting anecdotal supports of the Talmud, the Kabbalah, the Christian scriptures that Geddes McGregor, in his hermeneutic, interprets differently than all of the detractors who say, no, it doesn't mean that John the Baptist was the prophet Elias reincarnated. It means that the spirit of the prophet came back in John. See, it's a big difference. There is no reincarnation. We won't look at it like that. We'll look at what is it that people have had direct experience of in their own lives that makes them unafraid to die. They now believe, I will survive the death of my body. And again, trying to pull the circle together. What happens? That woman in Atlanta, the bookkeeper, who stood up unarmed against an armed madman. When she was listening to her pastor, she had a belief. I suspect that belief included an afterlife. But she was talking about her pastor and the belief in anchoring yourself in God. She had some sense that however this goes, if I hold to my integrity and my principles, this can only end in good. She deeply believed that. And when persons deeply believe that death is not the end, I wonder how much that might invest them with courage to say, I stand here because it's the truth. I stand here because it's valuable. I stand here because what you're proposing is abominable, and there's nothing that you can do to make me change. I wonder about the value of that belief. And so let us examine in the next talk the direct experiences in the testament of people and the transformation that's observed in their lives. So again, the White Queen said, I'm just 101, 5 months and a day today. I can't believe that, said Alice. Can't you? Try again. Draw a long breath. Shut your eyes. There's no use in trying. One can't believe impossible things. Well, I dare say you haven't had much practice. When I was your age, I always did it for half an hour a day. Why, sometimes I believed in as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast.